2. It was Broadway, just not the one I was expecting. It was busy. Buses chugged and puffed north and south. The exhaust gases billowing from the back of the rectangular boxes and wheels was dark and noxious. Something was indeed wrong. I had taken a bus to the train station before embarking to Central, and it was one of those natural gas burning things, all but odourless. People in their business clothes hurried to and fro. Tourists, country folk, and everyone in between choked the footpath in front of the shops and arcades. The smell was exhaust and cigarettes, no bushfire smoke. The cars and taxis looked out of place. They seemed like they were too old. I wandered toward the roadway, dodging pedestrians to get a closer look at a taxi that was stopped at the red light in the traffic queue. The bonnet showed a Ford badge, but it didn't look like any Falcon I remember ever seeing. The colour was different too, a very dull and faded pink with yellow pinstripes. The driver must have noticed me staring at his car because he honked his horn and gave me the old one-finger salute. I decided to turn back toward the southern end of the block and begin walking again. I really needed a beer now. The tobacco and exhaust aroma hit me again and I let out a short cough. The woman in front of me turned to see what was happening and gave me a bit of a look. I shook the cough and dirty look off and continued to head south, hoping to find a pub for a beer and a feed. Maybe even a chance to call the wife. I saw ladies in business suits and men dressed in theirs. There were a couple of tourists with old school cameras around their necks standing at the bus stop, waiting for a bus or a taxi, and taking photos of themselves with their goofy, oversized cameras. It had been a while since I was last in this part of the city, but it had changed significantly. It looked much different to how I remembered it from my last visit. In fact, I didn't recognise any of the fast food shops along the road. Where I thought a Subway once stood, there was a Goldie's. The Macca's I remembered my grandma taking me to when I was a boy of 10 was gone. It was replaced by a place called Ralph's. It looked like the Macca's, but it was called Ralph's. Who was Ralph? Who was Goldie? What did they sell? The pub in the corner looked different too. The facade was odd. Bright purple tiles from the base of the footpath to a foot over my head. Purple was odd. I looked up and saw what should have been the Agincourt Hotel. The flashing VIP lights were gone. A sign advertising a beer I'd never heard of before, and one thing I know about is beer, hung below a sign identifying the pub as the John MacArthur Hotel. Now, it had been a while since I was last here, but the joint could not have changed its name in that time. It certainly wouldn't have ditched the pokies either. Curiosity got the best of me and I poked my head through the open door of Goldie's. It could have been Subway, but for the name and decoration on the wall. The booths against the northern wall looked narrow and distinctly American, as though this place was a part of a set for a silly sitcom. The smell was pleasant enough, but I decided I didn't want to risk it and headed further up the road. The footpath was busy. I was struck by the sight of no one on the street wearing the ubiquitous white earbuds or oversized headphones as I walked along the side of the road. There were people, like me, listening to music, but it looked as though they were doing so using old school tape players. Wow. I spied a younger girl, maybe in her early teens, wearing baggy jeans and a plaid shirt open over a white t-shirt with some kind of logo on it. At my school, the girls were starting to dress like that. I didn't know why, so at least I thought there and then maybe things were normal. Maybe the other stuff had just been a daydream. It wasn't though. The Ralphs I walked past had a distinct smell. That fast food smell that gets you hooked and leads you by the nose into the building. I fought every urge in my body to not go in, but I did stop and have a look through the doors at the menu above the counter. It was more or less McDonald's, just under a different name. Why anyone would name the restaurant Ralph's when that phrase is often used for something else to do with food, I don't know. I felt a bump from someone on the roadside of me, the typical city you're in the way bump one gets from time to time when they stand around gawking like a tourist. I shuffled my backpack and kept walking onwards toward the pub on the corner. People I passed all seemed completely absorbed in their journeys, hurrying along like you would expect to see in any big city at peak hour. I turned my gaze across the street and saw people hurry and push to get on the buses arriving. I walked further south and came across the entry of the pub. The door was heavy when I pushed it to get access, but it wasn't going to stop me getting a beer and a feed. The bar was not as busy as I thought it would be on a Friday early evening. I supposed it was not a popular spot. It wasn't that far to Darling Harbour or even downtown. I still thought it would be busier than it seems now, though. I walked up to the bar and waited for the barman to make his way over to my location. He wore a smile that was purely for show. "How you doing?" he said. He was holding a schooner glass in one hand. "I'm good, thanks, mate," I replied. Being polite to people who handle you food and drink has always been of paramount importance to me. "How's yourself?" He grunted his response and waved the non-glass handing hand around the sparsely populated room. "I didn't own the joint, mate." "I'd be great. Now what can I get you?" I turned my gaze quickly to the tap row. None of the beers there I recognised. The brands were all strange. "Do you have Tooheys Old?" I asked, a little bit more sheepishly than I intended. The blank look in his face was answer enough. Just a black beer then, please," I said. He hesitated a moment and drew a schooner from the last tap on the row. A deep brown liquid flowed. It looked more like a brown ale than a dark ale. But anyway, I'll give it a try. He finished pouring the beer and put it on the bar. "That's $3.50, he said, and he held out his hand. I hesitated. $3.50? I hadn't paid that little for a beer since I started working. He saw the hesitation and rather defensively said, "That's how much it is, mate. $3.50. Don't like it? You know what you can do." I reached into my pocket and pulled out some change. $4. I handed it over. He took the coins without much of a thought and dropped them into the till. I took my beer, said my thanks, and wandered over to find a table to watch some sport. I drank my beer. It was good. Very good. I tried my best to slowly sip. The oddness of my surroundings finally hit home about halfway through the schooner. The telly on the wall was the large old-fashioned CRT type of TV. The colour was in and out, and occasionally the fuzz of snow covered the screen as the signal dropped in and out. I caught a bit of the news broadcast and saw the channel symbol was different. I took my phone out of my pocket, turned the music off and called the wife. The lock screen told me there was no signal. No signal in the middle of the largest city in the country? Bloody hell. I could see out the window as I sipped on my beer and watched a variety of people walk past. Over the course of the first and second beer, I was most puzzled by that as 7 o'clock rolled around, a group of men in what looked to be army fatigues walked past. They were all armed like some kind of mercenary from a movie. They were even wearing helmets. It was a first for me. I'd never seen anything like that in Sydney, not during the Olympics, not during World Youth Day, or even during the G20 summit that happened a while back. I was beginning to get scared. Where was I, if not in the harbour city that I knew all too well? What had happened? I finished the second beer and shipped the glass back to the bar. When old mate asked if I wanted another, I politely refused and set myself to make my way back to my hotel. It's just around the corner. Hopefully then I'd be able to have a bit of a think about what was going on. I left the pub and walked in the direction that I'd come from. Soon enough I passed the underpass that I came out of and paused a minute to cast a glance down that way. A voice from behind me, a gravelly voice, said, "I wouldn't go down there, champ." I turned around and see the owner of the voice was an old man. His head bald, his beard scruffy and grey. He was wearing a grey overcoat and faded blue jeans. I was just looking, I said. I don't know why, but I felt the need to justify myself to him. "Well, just don't go down there. In fact, you look like you're not from around here at all. You need to find somewhere to get inside. Now." He smiled at the last word and withdrew a badge from his pocket. It looked like a sheriff's badge out of a silly American TV show. I nodded and kept on my path to find my hotel.